All right, so this is about 15 minutes more work from where I left off last time, and now you can just see the basic details that appear in the deer head. Usually a trade-off to try to find out how deep do you need to go in order for those details to appear in either your 3D print or your casting. I would probably push things a little bit deeper just to make sure, because it's sometimes better to go further than not far enough, especially during the cleanup phase. So, but at the same time, I don't think I really want to spend too much more time on this in that sense, because the last thing that I really want to do before I start exporting this out for the purposes of 3D printing or for the purposes of rendering is to just put a little bit of that detail in that we see here in the sort of the hair of the mane of the deer. And I'm not going to try to be precise about that in any way. There's a lot of different ways you could do that. Basically the idea is to just get some sort of micro detail in there that is deep enough that it will come through in the print and in the casting. So you could do that. You could just draw it in. If I go to my brush menu, and you'll notice here that I am actually in a different layout than I was in the previous video. So let me just change back to a similar layout to what I was in before. If I go to my brush menu, and I go to something like Dam Standard, that is a reasonable tool for this particular operation. I could just kind of cut these in, and that does a pretty nice job. Right? I'll do a few of these here like that. I might actually really increase the intensity though, just to cut in there a lot deeper, because ultimately I do want this to come through. I don't want it to appear overly uniform, but I also don't want it to appear muddy either. Now the question is, do you want to have this pop out or pop in? And I'm kind of thinking in this case, just for a little bit of contrast, it might be a good idea if I just step back here through my undo stages a little bit. So it wasn't too far into that. It might be better, in fact, if I just I go to Z add instead of Z sub, and this way it will pop it out instead of pushing it in. That's okay. I think just for the sake of contrast here, that would work better. Right, so I'm going to do a little bit of this here. We will decide which one is the best option to go with in a minute. Another option would be, instead of the damn standard brush, we could go to something like the rake tool. And if I just try this out here, I'm going to turn off the alpha there. Alpha off. Oh, actually, no, the alpha was necessary on that one. Apologies. There we go. That's what comes with it by default. All right. This one isn't giving me quite the level of detail that I would like, so I'm going to turn on lazy mouse and see if that will do anything better. Nah, not really loving that one. But it is an option sometimes, especially if you have a larger area. It will kind of rake down, cut into it, gouge into it. Step back from that one. I'm just trying things here. I'm not sort of in love with any one particular option. I could also go to just our standard brush as well, and I could change the brush alpha there, and I could take maybe something like maybe this. Let's try this. Yeah, I get kind of similar results to what I got before. So really what I'm trying to do is just try different brushes and see which one gives me the best results. If I don't like the brush necessarily, I could also try going to drag rectangle and just pulling this out and seeing what it gives me as a result. I mean, that's kind of interesting, but it's a little bit soft. I could go back to maybe this and see what that gives me. Yeah, but not really quite right. There are a lot of other tools and alphas and brushes and stuff like that you can download from ZBrush Central. So just, giving you an idea of some of the options that I give myself as I look to this. So I think what I'm going to stick with is just damn standard, because that seemed to be the best one. And I'll just continue to add these in here just a little bit all over the place, trying to retain the basic flow to the head and the neck here. So my whole idea on this is, I like to make things not just work, but also look really nice as well. So I will spend a bit more time on what I'm creating. And if that's not your workflow, well, that's fine. You know, everybody has their own considerations. Time obviously is a big consideration for many, and you have to be, you know, sensitive to that. If time is a big thing, then you got to do things faster. But for me, I usually like to take the extra hour if I have it available and just use it. So I think I got mostly enough detail there. It gives the right impression without being too you know, too adventurous. And so let me just scale out here. Right, I think that's giving me a pretty nice result. I would probably just go in, and if I go back to my clay tool, clay buildup, just go in here and touch up this area slightly. Just trying to get the transition from the outer edges inside here a little bit more clean. I might smooth this out a bit. A little hard to see what I'm doing there on that edge. I switch back to just like the matte gray or red cap, just to see a little bit better what I'm doing here. Smooth, smooth, smooth a bit. Okay. And I reckon that that's probably close enough. All right, close enough for government work. All right, a few little things here on the edges that I might want to fix. I'll do that by going up to my hard polish, H polish tool, and I'm just going to reduce the intensity a bit. What I'm going to try to do here, and maybe a different material will make more sense for this. Just going to try to flatten this out here a bit without ruining the surface too much. And sometimes it will ruin the surface a little bit, so another option I have is just flatten. Right. So, that little bit of, you know, elevation change there is probably not enough to really be noticed too much. Again, the thing is that you get so caught up when you're working in ZBrush at looking at this little tiny fine detail here, but the reality is that this is the ring blown up to like gigantic size. So you really have to appreciate it for, you know, what this actual size of the ring would be in the end. You know, something about that size or so. I typically like to just do a very quick preview render to see how much detail will come through on the screen, and I'll do that by clicking on the BPR icon, which is Best Preview Render. And this will just give me a little bit better render in the scene based on the lighting. And again, much of that detail that I've put in there really is not tremendously visible. Might be a little bit small for a Signet ring, but all the same. So, you know, like I said, it does come down to how much resolution your printer has. It comes down to how good your casting is as well, the kind of investment that you're using. And ultimately, I do try to go for as much detail as possible, and I do keep in mind that sometimes, look, you know, I might really want to go in, and if I grab that damn standard again, I might just actually try to make these slightly bigger, because they might really not be all that visible otherwise. So that's just kind of a reality about sculpting. Doesn't look so nice when you're up this close, but it might be necessary in order to be able to see the detail later. Okay, and I'll scale that back down. Yeah, it's a little bit better. I can kind of see it now. All right, so let me save this real quick. Save as, and I'll save that as 04. Again, I mentioned before that I save in iterations, and that's just in case I accidentally make a huge mistake somewhere along the line. And that way I don't have a corrupted file, and I'd have to start all over again. Okay, so the final thing that we need to do in order to get this out of here is to export it. At the moment, however, this file has on the par of 680,000 polygons, which is a bit heavy and unnecessarily large. So if I were to even take a look at the polyframe view, where I can see all my polygons, it's just unnecessarily dense, especially all over this part of the ring where there's no extra detail. So the best thing to do is to allow ZBrush to go through and find areas that it feels it can throw out some polygonal detail, and then to keep a higher concentration of polygonal detail in the areas where there is in fact more detail to begin with. And that would be using what's called decimation. Now to bring that up, we need to go to ZPlugin. The plugins are obviously little additional things that come with ZBrush. Some of these things you can add in yourself, but many of these ones come on their own. Decimation Master is one of them. So we'll click on Decimation Master. And sorry that there's sort of this overlay is happening here. I can't really do much about that. In fact, actually, I can do a little bit something about that. I can grab this little sort of circle with an arrow pointing to the upper left, and if I click and drag that over here onto this dock, I can just drop this menu right here. So it's a little bit easier to see what's going on. So Decimation Master, there we go. That's one of the ways that you can customize the ZBrush interface. Decimation is a two-step process. You have to pre-process the ring first, or the geometry first. That's where ZBrush goes through and determines whether or not detail can be thrown out in a particular area. And so we'll click on that first, and I'll go through. It usually takes it a couple moments to do that. And after we pre-process this, then we can actually go through and indicate the percentage of decimation that we want to work with. So like I said, we were at 680,000 polygons before. Right now, I could change the percentage of decimation, and this means this would result in 20% of the original number of polygons, which if I bring out my calculator, says that 680,000, that's that, times 0.2 would be 136,000. So if I just try that real quick, right, to verify, at 20% decimation, just hit decimate current. Right. Notice that we don't really see any difference to the surface here, but now we're at 135,000 points, which is not the same as polygons, but it is sort of the reduction that has been created here. The difference here that we would see, though, if I could turn on polyframe, is now you can notice that there is a lot of information that's been thrown out, especially on the surface of the Signet, as well as even here on the sides. This is what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like after the decimation. And you can see that all that detail that we are creating in here in the deer is still preserved. It's really quite tight and dense in there, but we can do better than this. So I'm just going to undo, and I will change my decimation down to something like 2% and see what we get. Now, obviously it's thrown out a lot more information, and there's a lot more faceting going on, or tessellation that's happened in the deer itself. That might be a little bit low. So let's just undo that real quick, and I'll push this up to maybe 5% now, decimate, and that looks pretty darn good. There obviously has been a bit of a change. If I switch back and forth between here, that was before, that's the original, and that's after. But as you can probably respect, when we zoom out, that is going to be totally irrelevant. And what we get now is a model that has 67,000 polygons instead of 680,000, so it's like 10% the original size, and all the detail that we need is preserved, which is great. And this is really easy to export now. I would export this out. There's a couple ways you can do it. I tend to go about the route of simply going to export and saying export OBJ. In this case, I would call this, how about Signet complete. And there are other ways. There is this STL exporter or I should say 3D print exporter here, right? And this does give you the options to export things as STLs, but I always find that it ends up messing up the scale somehow. So I'm not a big fan of that. I rather just take this file that I've created, and if I'm going to send it off to a 3D printer, I'll bring it back into NetFab and export it from NetFab as an STL, and that retains everything. It's that's just the way that it works best. I don't do any cleanup in NetFab. I just export it directly, and when I bring it into Magix for 3D printing, I do all my cleanup in there. The other thing is, if you're going to bring this into like Rhino for rendering, this will import into Rhino really nicely. So I'll just bring that in real quick. Right. And so if I import that in, go and find our deer head there, and we don't want to import a 3DM. We'll just look for not Vermals, look for Signet complete, and there we go. The size is still preserved, so ZBrush has not messed up the scale at all. It's preserved the original scale. And if I go to turn on my rendered view, there we go. I would not worry too much about this kind of tessellation that you're seeing here. This is not significant enough to be all that much of a concern, but if you do feel like it's not right for you, if you feel like it's causing you any kind of worry, or if it's showing up weird in your renders for whatever reason, then just step back to that Decimation Master and don't reduce the polygon count so much. So it's it really depends on what you're comfortable with. So you could render this out and you'd be just fine. So I'm going to stop there and say hopefully this has been a helpful tutorial. It's a process that I use. I wouldn't necessarily do it exactly this way if I was doing this signet ring, but it is a process that I use similar to the way that I especially put detail on the side of signet rings. If I need to reflect that detail over simultaneously, it can be really useful instead of having to draw it twice. And yeah, I'm quite pleased with the workflow. And thank you for watching.